My name is Rick Donnelly. I'm 62 years old, and until this morning, I was the Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Manufacturing for 15 years. I joined when we were a struggling family business with 3 small factories in Cincinnati. Now, we're a publicly traded company with 18 plants across the Midwest. I help navigate us through to recessions, an acquisition crisis, and more boardroom politics than I care to remember. I'm not flashy. I don't schmooze investors at cocktail parties. But the numbers were always right, the books were always clean, and we never missed a filing deadline on my watch. Then Travis Mercer arrived, 36 years old, in designer blazers and expensive sneakers. The board brought him in as CEO 3 months ago. He swept through our offices like a tornado, talking about synergy, disruption, and realigning vision. I knew what was coming the moment he scheduled our first one-on-one meeting. "The market's changing, Rick," he said, leaning back in my chair, feet propped on my desk. "We need someone who speaks the language of modern finance." I said nothing, just nodded once and offered a tight-lipped handshake. "We're bringing in Zachary Hughes to 29, brilliant mind. Just did a TEDx talk on financial innovation that's getting real traction online." "I see," I said, my voice steady. "When's the transition?" Travis smiled, surprised by my calm. 2 weeks. We'll announce it at the next board meeting." I packed my personal items that afternoon while everyone was in an all-hands meeting about our exciting new direction. 15 years in this office, and everything fit in a single cardboard box. Family photos, a commemorative coin from our IPO, the leather portfolio my wife Patricia gave me before she passed. On my way out, I noticed Bethany from accounts holding back tears by the elevator. She'd been with me since day one. "Don't worry," I told her. "It's all part of the cycle." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly documenting a series of questionable transactions that started appearing in our books shortly after Travis arrived and grew more frequent after he mentioned bringing in his finance guru, Zachary. I wasn't planning revenge. I was just doing my job, keeping the books clean. Even on my way out, I grew up working in my father's hardware store in Covington, Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati. He taught me that numbers don't lie even when people do. I put myself through college stocking shelves and balancing his books at night. When I graduated, I turned down bigger offers to stay local, working my way up through regional companies until Meridian's founder, Harold Phillips, called me personally in 2008. "I need someone who can keep us afloat through this recession," he said. "Someone who sleeps better when the books balance." For 10 years, Harold and I built Meridian into something solid. When he retired, the transition was smooth. The new CEO, Diana Wright, respected the systems we'd created. We disagreed sometimes, but she listened. We grew steadily, no flashy moves, just solid business practices and clean accounting. Then Diana retired, and the board wanted fresh energy. Enter Travis Mercer, Harvard MBA, a stint at a Silicon Valley startup with more buzz than profit. The first red flag appeared during his second week. He bypassed our procurement protocols to hire a marketing consultant, his former classmate, at 4 times our standard rate. When I questioned it, he smiled. "We're thinking bigger now, Rick. The old constraints don't apply." The second flag came when he restructured our reporting lines so finance went through his new chief innovation officer before reaching him. The third, overhearing him tell someone on the phone that our books had a lot of outdated methodology that needed creative solutions. I started watching more closely. Small irregularities appeared, vendor contracts with companies I couldn't properly vet, consultancy fees without deliverables, budget reallocations without department head signatures. My team noticed too. Kevin from internal audit stopped by one evening as I was reviewing the quarterly statements. "Something's off with the new tech investment tracking," he said quietly. "The numbers don't match from entry to report." "Document everything," I told him. Just keep it factual. Patricia would have told me to make waves, stand up in a board meeting, go out with a bang. But cancer took her 3 years ago. Without her fire, I'd grown more methodical, more patient. So instead of confrontation, I kept detailed records, downloaded suspicious transactions, cross-referenced irregularities, all while maintaining the same calm demeanor in meetings. Even as Travis brought in more of his people and pushed out mine, I wasn't being paranoid. The patterns were too consistent. Something bigger was happening, and it centered around this new finance wonderkid, Zachary Hughes. My final board meeting lasted exactly 22 minutes. There was no mention of my 15 years of service, no thank you speech, no plaque or watch. Just a line on the agenda that read, CFO Transition Update. Travis spoke about exciting new fiscal directions while I sat silently at the far end of the table. The chairman, William Foster, couldn't quite meet my eyes. He'd been on the board when Harold hired me. Now he simply nodded along with Travis's presentation about how Zachary Hughes would revolutionize our approach to capital allocation. I'd hoped for at least some acknowledgement from William, some recognition of what we'd built together. Instead, the meeting moved briskly to the next agenda item, the new headquarters Travis wanted to build downtown. As everyone filed out, William paused briefly by my chair. You've been an asset, Rick, he said awkwardly, patting my shoulder. Best of luck. An asset, like a piece of equipment that had depreciated. I walked back to my office, Zachary's office now, to collect my box. Through the glass wall, I could see Travis showing him around, pointing at the graphs on my walls like they were ancient cave paintings. Bethany was waiting by my door, holding an envelope. The accounting department took up a collection, she said, for a proper send-off dinner. I thanked her, knowing I wouldn't use it. As she turned to leave, I asked, Bethany, when did those invoices from Vertex Solutions start coming in? She thought for a moment. February, I think. Right after Mr. Mercer announced the Digital Transformation Initiative. February, 2 weeks before Travis first mentioned bringing in Zachary. That night at home, I spread all my documentation across my dining room table, 6 months of suspicious transactions, invoices for services never rendered, foreign consulting fees without tax documentation, and most telling, shell vendors that all traced back to a holding company called Alpine Innovations, which had been registered just 3 days before Travis was announced as CEO. The pattern was clear now. Travis hadn't brought in Zachary because I was old school. He'd brought him in because they had a system, siphoning company funds through fake vendors and consultants, hiding it in complex digital transformation costs that were hard to question in today's business environment. They needed me gone because I asked too many questions, kept too close an eye on the details. I sat back in my chair, looking at the evidence laid out before me. For the first time since Patricia died, I felt something beyond the numb routine of daily existence. Not anger exactly, something colder, more focused. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything methodically. Cross-references, timelines, account trails. I wasn't going to confront Travis. I wasn't going to call an emergency board meeting or go to the press. That wasn't my style. No, I would do what I'd always done. Let the numbers tell the story. But this time, I'd make sure the right people were listening when they spoke. A week after my departure, I decided to reach out to William Foster directly. Despite his lukewarm goodbye, he'd always been fair. He deserved a chance to address this before it got worse. I called his office and left a message with his assistant. Just wanted to discuss some financial concerns from my final weeks. Nothing urgent, but worth reviewing. He called back the next day. His voice was guarded. Rick, good to hear from you. Travis mentioned you might reach out. My stomach tightened. He said you were having trouble transitioning. Said you had some concerns about our new systems that Zachary already addressed. William, there are irregularities that predate Zachary's arrival. Significant ones. Silence on the line. Then, look, Rick, I understand this is difficult, 15 years is a long time, but the board has full confidence in Travis's vision, and Zachary has already streamlined several processes you flagged as problematic. That's not. I'm afraid I have another call. Perhaps we can catch up at the holiday party. I hear you're still on the invite list. Very generous of Travis, considering. But William had already hung up. The next morning, I received an email from Meridian's legal department. The language was carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Any accusations of financial impropriety without substantial evidence could be considered defamatory. They kindly reminded me of my confidentiality agreement. They were closing ranks. Someone, Travis, obviously, had anticipated I might notice the discrepancies and had already poisoned the well. I decided to try another approach. Kevin from Internal Audit had been on my team for 8 years. If anyone else had noticed problems, it would be him. We met at a diner far from the office. Kevin looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. They promoted me, he said before I could even ask about the accounts. New title, big raise. I'm now reporting directly to Zachary. Congratulations, I said, keeping my tone even. How's that working out? Kevin stared at his coffee. They've changed all the internal reporting systems. New software, new protocols. Zachary says it's more efficient. And is it? He looked up, his expression strained. Rick, I can't. They had me sign additional NDAs. They're watching everyone who worked closely with you. They're saying things, Rick, about why you left. What things? Kevin lowered his voice. That you were resistant to necessary changes. That you made mistakes in the last quarter's reporting. That Zachary caught some. People are even saying there were ethical concerns. My hands gripped my coffee mug so hard I thought it might break. They weren't just pushing me out. They were destroying my reputation to cover their tracks. I should go, Kevin said, throwing cash on the table. I've got a mortgage and twins starting college next year. I can't. It's all right, I said, forcing a smile. Take care of your family, Kevin. As he hurried out, I sat alone, processing what I'd learned. My options were dwindling. The board wouldn't listen. My former team was either bored off or scared silent. And now they were attacking my reputation, making it nearly impossible for me to raise concerns without looking like a disgruntled ex-employee. They thought they had me cornered, but they'd overlooked something important. I still had access to the audit server. During my final days, while everyone thought I was quietly cleaning out my office, I'd set up an emergency admin account, a standard practice for system transitions that no one had bothered to check. It wouldn't last forever, but it might be enough. That night, I used my emergency credentials to access Meridian's audit server. I suspected they'd eventually discover and remove the account, so I worked efficiently, following the money trails I'd already identified. What I found made my earlier suspicions seem quaint by comparison. Alpine Innovations wasn't just one holding company, it was a hub in a network of shell entities, all interconnected through a maze of transactions designed to hide their relationship. Some dated back to before Travis even joined Meridian, suggesting this wasn't an opportunistic theft. It was a planned infiltration. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Travis hadn't been hired despite his mediocre track record. He'd been installed. His previous company, the Silicon Valley startup with more buzz than profit, had been bankrolled by the same investment group that had recently gained 3 seats on Meridian's board, including the seat held by William Foster's nephew, Jacob, who joined 6 months ago. This wasn't just an executive skimming from the company. This was a coordinated attack on Meridian itself, a slow-motion asset strip disguised as modernization. I downloaded everything I could find, organizing it meticulously. By dawn, I had traced over $12 million that had been siphoned from various departments through falsified vendor contracts, inflated service agreements, and phantom consultancy fees. Exhausted, I made coffee and sat on my back porch, watching the sun rise over the Ohio River. Patricia and I had bought this house for the view. Water calms your overthinking brain, she'd said. Now, I let the river's steady flow organize my thoughts. My initial instinct to quietly alert the board had been naive. This went deeper than Travis and Zachary. Some board members were likely complicit, which explained why they'd been so eager to replace Diana with an outsider when she retired. I needed to be smarter about this, more strategic. I spent the morning mapping connections between board members, Travis's previous associates, and the shell companies. By afternoon, I'd identified 3 board members who were likely unaware of the scheme. Elaine Morrison, a former manufacturing executive who joined the board after retiring from a competitor. David Patel, who represented our workers' pension fund. Anthony Wilson, our oldest board member, who rarely spoke but never missed a vote. I also discovered something I'd overlooked. Zachary Hughes had worked at Vertex Solutions, one of the shell vendors, 3 years ago. His name was buried in their incorporation documents as a founding partner, though he'd been removed from public-facing materials before being hired at Meridian as CFO. As I compiled this information, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. "Is this Richard Donnelly?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name is Vanessa Taylor. I'm with the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division." My heart stopped momentarily. "We've received an anonymous tip about potential financial improprieties at Meridian Manufacturing involving its new leadership team. The information provided suggested you might have relevant knowledge." I chose my words carefully. "I recently left my position as CFO after 15 years. Yes, we're aware. Would you be willing to meet informally to discuss certain transactions that occurred over the past 6 months? Who else knows you're calling me?" "No one outside my immediate team. This is preliminary fact-finding, not a formal investigation yet." I considered my options. Going to the SEC directly would make this very public, very quickly. Meridian stock would plummet. Thousands of employees, people like Bethany and Kevin, could be affected if the company collapsed under a scandal. But someone had already tipped off the SEC. The clock was ticking. "I'll need some time," I said finally, "to make sure I get this right." I gave myself 3 days to execute my plan. 3 days later, I met with Vanessa Taylor from the SEC in a quiet conference room above a coffee shop near Union Station. She brought 2 colleagues, a forensic accountant named Marcus Lee and an investigator named Daniel Reyes. I laid out my timeline first, not accusations, just documented facts. Dates of transactions, shell company registrations, internal communications I'd preserved. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Marcus took detailed notes. Daniel asked pointed questions about accounting procedures I gladly answered. When I finished, Vanessa leaned forward. "We've seen similar patterns before," she said, "but usually in companies collapsing under fraud, not thriving ones like Meridian." "They're not collapsing yet," I said. "That's why this needs handling carefully." She nodded. "We'll need your affidavit and full access to those dead man switches you mentioned." I hesitated only a moment before sliding a USB drive across the table. Inside were encrypted folders containing everything: transaction trails, personnel changes, my analysis of board connections. Marcus plugged it into his laptop. The decryption process began automatically. As they reviewed the initial files, Vanessa spoke again. "We'll move discreetly. No warrants, no press leaks. We want to protect the company and its employees." "Good," I said. "There are people who didn't know what was happening. They shouldn't suffer for this." They left 2 hours later with copies of key documents and my signed statement. I returned home, emptied my coffee mug from the night before, and opened my laptop one last time. I drafted 3 emails. The first went to Elaine Morrison, the former manufacturing executive on the board who had remained silent during Travis's rise. I included only the most undeniable evidence: Alpine Innovation's connection to pre-Meridian transactions, Zachary's history with Vertex Solutions, and the coordinated NDA expansions. The second email went to David Patel, representing the workers' pension fund. I focused on how the fraud affected employee investments and retirement plans. The third email reached Anthony Wilson, the oldest board member. I appealed to institutional memory, referencing Meridian's founding values and Harold Phillips' original vision. I scheduled all three to send at 8 a.m. the next morning. Then I shut down my computer. For the first time since Patricia died, I felt something close to peace. 2 weeks later, Bethany called me at dawn. "They're holding an emergency board meeting," she said, voice shaking. Elaine Morrison called it herself. "Internal audit is involved now, and some outside lawyers." I sat up slowly, pulling back the curtains. Rain streaked the windows. "Is Kevin still there?" I asked. "He's been reassigned to compliance. He says they're watching him." "Good," I said. "Let them watch." By noon, news broke internally that Zachary Hughes had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Travis Mercer was reportedly cooperating fully with auditors. I watched from the sidelines as the machine I built turned its gaze inward. The truth had finally found its way to the right people. And this time, they weren't looking away. 3 days after my meeting with the SEC, I executed the final phase of my plan. First, I needed to ensure the evidence couldn't be erased. I copied all my documentation to multiple secure locations and set up dead man switches. If I didn't enter a code every 48 hours, the full package would automatically send to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and 3 financial journalists I respected. Next, I carefully drafted emails to the 3 board members I believed were uninvolved: Elaine Morrison, David Patel, and Anthony Wilson. I didn't accuse anyone directly. Instead, I framed it as concerning patterns I noticed before my departure, and included just enough evidence to raise serious questions without overwhelming them with details. I scheduled these to send automatically in 2 days. The most delicate part came next. I contacted Bethany, asking if she could meet me for coffee. She agreed immediately. "They're gutting your whole department," she told me when we met, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zachary says we're consolidating financial operations, but half the team has gotten reassignment notices, and the other half is being reviewed." She blinked back tears. 22 years at Meridian, and suddenly I'm told my position is redundant. I waited while she composed herself. "Bethany, do you remember that audit protocol we established after the Jackson acquisition? The one with the separate verification pathway?" She frowned, then understanding dawned. "The parallel audit trail. Yes. The one that automatically duplicates all transactions over $50,000 to the secure server. As far as I know, it's hard-coded into the system. Zachary's team would have to specifically know about it to disable it." I nodded, relief washing over me. "And who has access to those records now?" "Just the senior auditing team, and I guess Zachary, since he's CFO. What about the backup archiving? Is that still sent to Iron Mountain on the 1st of each month?" She thought for a moment. "Yes, that's automated too. The October backup would have gone out last week." "Perfect. Even if Travis and Zachary discovered what I was doing and tried to alter the records, the originals would already be safely preserved off-site." "Bethany, I'm going to ask you something important, and you can absolutely say no." I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside is a formal letter detailing specific financial concerns that, as a senior accounting manager, you're obligated to report to internal audit. It references only information you would have legitimate access to in your role. If you submit this, they legally cannot retaliate against you without triggering whistleblower protections. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. "Is this why they're really pushing me out? Because I might notice these things?" "Probably. And if I submit this, it creates an official internal record that can't be ignored. It forces internal audit to investigate specific transactions, the same ones I've documented elsewhere." Bethany squared her shoulders. "When? Tomorrow morning would be ideal. On my way home, I made two more stops. First to a notary public, where I signed and authenticated a detailed affidavit about everything I'd discovered. Then to my lawyer's office, where I left sealed instructions to be opened if anything happened to me. That evening, I received a text message from Kevin, auditors asking lots of questions about old audit protocols. Seems nervous. Watch yourself. They were starting to realize their mistake. They'd been so focused on pushing me out that they'd overlooked what I might have already documented. 6 weeks after my departure, everything detonated simultaneously. The internal audit triggered by Bethany's formal complaint reached Zachary's desk the same morning that my detailed emails reached the 3 uninvolved board members. By noon, Elaine Morrison had called an emergency board meeting using her authority as audit committee chair. I wasn't there, but Bethany texted me updates throughout the day. Board meeting started at 2 o'clock. Travis looking pale. Z just got escorted to a conference room with legal. Outside auditors arrived, taking over main conference room. By evening, the news had broken internally. Meridian was under investigation for financial irregularities. All executives who had joined under Travis's tenure were placed on administrative leave pending a full forensic audit. I turned off my phone and took a long walk along the river, watching the Cincinnati skyline light up as darkness fell. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. The next morning, I received 3 missed calls from William Foster, from Travis, and from Jacob Foster. I ignored them all. Instead, I answered a call from Anthony Wilson, our oldest board member. 15 years of clean books, he said, his voice gravelly with age. No scandals, no restatements, no misfilings. I should have spoken up when they pushed you out. You're speaking up now, Anthony. That's what matters. The board has appointed me acting chairman while we sort through this mess. William and Jacob have resigned, along with 2 others. We've terminated Travis and Zachary for cause. I said nothing. We'd like you to come back, Rick, just temporarily, to help the forensic team and stabilize things. I watched a barge slowly making its way down the Ohio, steady and purposeful. I'll help with the investigation, I said finally, but I won't be coming back permanently. May I ask why? Because Meridian needs someone who can innovate, I said, allowing myself a small smile. I'm just a little too old school. 3 months later, I sat on my new deck in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. My cabin wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms and an office, but the view made up for it. The investigation at Meridian had uncovered exactly what I'd suspected, a coordinated scheme to extract value through fraudulent contracts and artificial costs. Travis, Zachary, and several board members now face federal charges for securities fraud and embezzlement. I'd spent 6 weeks helping the forensic accountants unravel everything, then packed up my Cincinnati house and headed for the mountains. Patricia and I had always talked about retiring to the settlement. The consulting fee Meridian offered during the investigation was generous enough to buy this cabin outright and still have plenty left over. I'd been clear with them. No public statements, no press conferences, no dramatic returns. That wasn't my style. My phone buzzed with a text from Bethany. Got the promotion to director of accounting. The new CEO wants to rebuild the department properly. I smiled and typed back, well deserved. Always keep a parallel audit trail. My lawyer had called yesterday with news that the SEC was closing its case against Meridian after the company agreed to governance reforms and financial penalties, pointedly excluding punishment for shareholders and regular employees. The right outcome. As darkness settled over the mountains, I opened the leather portfolio Patricia had given me years ago. Inside was the last photo we'd taken together, at the lake house the summer before her diagnosis. You were right, I said to her smiling face. I should have made more time for views like this. Tomorrow, I'd drive into town and meet with the director of a local nonprofit who needed help organizing their finances. Nothing flashy, just good, clean accounting, for people doing important work. Some might call that old school. I just called it integrity.